This is a bonus episode of the WTF Bach podcast. This is a bonus episode. Aren't you so lucky? This is a bonus episode. Bonus episode of the WTF Bach podcast.
It's Evan Shenners here, bringing you the final volume of Performer's Commentary and the third volume of my newly released 3 albums, which, should I be so fortunate, and even a little fortuitous, should eventually represent the first 3 in, well, hard to say, at least 20 albums covering the complete solo keyboard works of J.S. Bach. The first album was in a dramatic quarter-comma mean tone temperament, the second on some very guitar-like, lute, harpsichord-like piano instrument, and this one, why, it's just in equal temperament, on a piano, A equals 440. Nothing out of the ordinary here. So if you found my 2 first albums too much of a departure from your preferred piano album, this album should set you more at ease. The repertoire covered is just a bunch of preludes and fugues. There are probably 2 full albums in this project of what I call loose preludes and fugues. That is, preludes and fugues that were not grouped into the Well-Tempered Clavier or other bigger sets of pieces. It's quite a smattering. This is volume 1 of these loose preludes and fugues. This album features all styles of Bach, from the very early to the very late, and because I think these pieces are probably somewhat longer than the previous dance movements, say in the suites of the first 2 albums, you might have some more time to just listen to my playing rather than my talking. So I hope you enjoy, and here ends the self-promotion of these 3 albums, which you've certainly bought by now, and maybe you're streaming them on Spotify and you want to wear a WTF Bach t-shirt while streaming, to get into the proper headspace. So send me an email. I will arrange a sale. Meanwhile, sit back, relax, and enjoy the Performer's Commentary to Volume 3 of the complete solo keyboard works by J.S. Bach. Thanks. Performer's Commentary, Miscellaneous Preludes and Fugues, Part 1. Yes, meaning there are more preludes and fugues to come on Part 2. This opening track is exciting to those of us in the Bach world as it's a somewhat new piece, discussed in the literature as late as 2005, 2006. It doesn't mean that it was discovered then, it just means that scholars have been mulling this over and only now have decided that this is, in fact, authentically Bach's. It's mature, if not even a late work. It reminds us of the 2-part counterpoint in the 4 duets. It's so short that I'm going to run out of time to talk about it. He's sort of exploded the theme everywhere. You've got shards of it into every corner. Last fact, it's BWV Diest. Diest meaning missing from the catalog. It's missing from the BWV catalog. Let's go on. Now, this is BWV 947. Quite a long fugue, very flashy, in the Italian style. Like the piece before it, it was also not published by the New Bach edition, the NBA, until again, around 2005-2006, as aspersions were cast on the authenticity of the work. Was it Bach? Is it Bach? Who else could it have been? But now we in fact do believe it is an early piece of the master. Very virtuosic, double thirds in the right hand a lot. Bach has this idea when he's young. A lot of his fugal subjects have repeated notes, the same note over and over in the theme. There is something in this fugue that reminds me of the famous G minor violin fugue, BWV 1001, of which we get 3 versions actually, the BWV 1000, the lute harpsichord, and in the D minor prelude and fugue pair of the organ. There's something very similar. This, for example, here, reminds me of that moment in the violin fugue in B-flat major where the theme is on all 4 strings in the fiddle. this section twice here. There's the second time. And I believe the ending of this fugue is just on a quarter note. Something like that. And oh, how strange the change from minor to major. This is BWV 949. It's a very sprawling fugue. We see how similar the fugal subject is with the repeated notes. We'll see in the first part of the fugue, these repeated notes go up and up. And in the second half, they go down. Now, the style of this fugue fits in with those of the fugues that Bach arranged from themes from Tommaso Albinoni, the Italian composer. Early in Bach's life, he was learning, and, well, he was always learning, but especially early, he was taking from other composers, and especially was fond of fugal subjects from Albinoni's Opus 1. We have at least 3 fugues that are based on Albinoni's fugal subject. And this one might fit in there. Robert Hill, or even earlier Philip Spitta, they suggest that this fugue belongs to the Albinoni fugues. At the moment, this fugue is considered on an original theme because we can't locate the Albinoni. Here's where the theme comes upside down. In the bass here. You hear it going down. Just the lyricism of this fugue always astounds me. One of my favorite fugues to play, I think. Going apart. He's really thinking about direction in this fugue. Certain lines going up, certain lines going down. Listen to them just spreading apart. And now in the middle, the theme has already started going back up again. Listen to the theme in the middle there going down while the bass climbs up. And this line here, just A major scale in the right hand. Here we go. And chromatic theme, E sharp there. We're approaching the climax where Bach will put in pedal notes. Was it for the organ? Probably not. Maybe some sort of a pedal harpsichord, pedal clavichord even. On the modern piano, we have to make use of the middle pedal or creative fingerings, as I use, I think, both in this recording. And here's this sort of cadenza, flourish, pedal tone here in the bass. More bass notes. And this very cute ending here. Very unique. This is a fuguetta, BWV 961, often grouped into books with the other, quote, easy pieces. This is a 2-voice little fugue. The date of the composition unknown, but I'm willing to say it's later, if not late, very mature at least. The texture, despite being only 2 voices, is very rich. There's something about the shapes. And the harmony reminds me of his da capo fugues, say from the lute harpsichord works with the two da capo fugues in E flat major and C minor. Say something like this harmony here, the G flat. Deceptively simple work. How long did it take him to write? Certainly not as long as it takes us to learn. Right, and we went from fugue to prelude, in this case, instead of from prelude to fugue. This astonishing work is really a fantasy. It should be included among the fantasies, but for some reason it's called Prelude, which is why it appears on this album. It has all the hallmarks of a fantasy: wanderingness, improvising, the virtuosity. It's an early piece from around 1707. Again, for some sort of pedal harpsichord, which is why I'm being very liberal with the use of pedal and the bass notes. This, for example. It reminds us of our early fantasies, the virtuosic Bach trying to surprise the listener. This is like a jig, and it's jumpy left hand, and then new texture, different. It reminds us really of the middle of the D major toccata. Sorry, just calling these references out as if everyone has an encyclopedic knowledge of it, but listen to the middle section of, say, the D major toccata, and I think you'll hear the same bop, 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 bop texture. Again, another section. We imagine him improvising and then later writing it down. And now this last section here, a few arpeggios, and then he writes prestissimo, and he calls for use of the feet and the hands. And I had to come up with a solution that involved the hands, obviously. Here it is, and prestissimo. I believe, quarter note, very short. Now you recognize this as the first prelude of Book 2, but it doesn't quite sound like that, does it? It's obviously the early version, the seed that grew into the tree that is the Well-Tempered Clavier, Book 2. You see, what happened was in 1726, only 4 years after finishing the first part of the Well-Tempered Clavier, Bach took up his pen and composed 5 new preludes and fugues. This one, and 4 others that are scattered throughout this record. Bach himself didn't know that these 5 little preludes and fugues would become another set of 24 preludes and fugues through all tonalities. The connoisseurs of Book 2 will recognize the bits and pieces which got recycled into Book 2. Let's go on to the fugue. The fugues in general that got recycled into Book 2 are similar to the early versions of Book 1, mostly the same. You will notice very few differences between this and the final version of the fugue, whereas if you look at the preludes, they're very, very different. The lovely thing about these 5 preludes and fugues is that they make a wonderful set on their own, and I don't think they're quite often played on their own, though they do make a really charming set for someone looking to program, a small set of Bach preludes and fugues onto a recital. This is the way to do it instead of playing an entire book of the Wild Tempo Clavier. And I'm surprised at a few of the choices Bach made. For example, we'll see the last few tracks on this album are the G major Prelude and Fugue. And the Prelude, which I find such a masterpiece, he did not put it into Book 2 of the Wild Tempo Clavier. And here's the end. Let's go on to the next one. But, as you can see, I do not keep those 5 preludes and fugues together on this disc, because now it's time for this BWV 959. What is with that theme? Here comes the answer. There's an augmented second in the subject. Here we'll hear it. Also in the answer, going down, symmetrical augmented seconds. Here's yet another voice. This is early Bach, really pushing the limits. One of my absolute favorite fugues from the early years. The voice, so very idiosyncratic. When I'm listening to this, I'm thinking I wouldn't identify Bach as the composer. It sounds a bit too forward-thinking. I don't know who else I would say, though. When you are familiar with the early Bach, this voice becomes recognizable, but before then you think, was this really how Bach wrote? For example, these modulations here. And this. Chromatic drops. Think it could be over here, but no. Where's it going now? Blurring the line between fugue and fantasy. Here. What is that? Now where are we? Stretto, fugues coming in. Themes coming in, rather. Tritones landing on the downbeat. Deceptive cadence, virtuosic sort of flourishes. And is it going to end now? No. We have to have an improvised cadenza. And then finally, so avant-garde, so forward-looking, this music, these shapes, so modern, abstract, theoretical. And now we return to the 5 preludes and fugues that were dissembled to form Book 2. Now this prelude here, very special. It did not make the cut in Book 2, so it remains sort of on its own in the Bach universe. I know no minute of music more pleasant, so I will shut my mouth and wonder at these arpeggios here. But you say, I recognize that fugue. That is... What is that fugue? That is A-flat major, Book 2. Yes, it is. This fugue became the A-flat major fugue in the second part of the Weltable Clavier, but it first appeared here with this set of 5 preludes and fugues in F major. And Bach, finally, as he finished the assembly of Book 2, he looked around and said, I need a fugue in A-flat major, I don't have one. So he took this fugue, he shifted it from F into A-flat major, and he doubled it. He actually doubled the length of the composition. So what you hear at the cadence, at the finale of this fugue, is the halfway part of the A-flat major, and only Bach could make such a surgery. He could make a fugue that's halfway as long and double the length seem complete. And there, it's complete here, but twice as long in A-flat major. Marvelous. Okay, again from the 5 preludes and fugues that were the seeds of Book 2. This is the D minor pair. Neither the prelude nor the fugue made it into Book 2, but they are beautiful. Listen to this organ-like prelude with these long pedal tones. Multiple layers of counterpoint. I find this, personally, this more interesting than the 2-voice prelude, which made the cut, you could say, for Book 2. Dissecting these preludes is like dissecting a flower. You know, you pull it apart and then there's another leaf there, and there's another leaf there. You hear everywhere. You hear the subject, the essence of this prelude. Yes, that is the subject. Very simple. 1, 2, 3 notes up, 3 notes down. Where do we find it? Well, here it is, the bass. Here it is in the top. Little episode. Now on the bass. Now up top. And in the middle, and back down in the bass. And here, the final phrase, short fugue, this one, with that chromatic squeeze, the crunch, and the resolution. Yes, now this is the E minor from the same set, so we've actually gone in order from D minor to E minor. This prelude, very virtuosic when you look at it. These notes here. 30 seconds. This fugue did also not make the cut for Book 2, neither did the fugue. Alone, they form a stunning pair, as the fugue is gigantic. The Henley edition of this prelude is full of misprints, beware. This prelude ends with a loud but brief flourish. Poof. And this fugue, in sections, the theme. Here's the answer. Episodes, waiting for the third voice to come in. Here it is in the bass. And that's the exposition. We're going to do some modulating now. theme in the middle. Theme in the bass in here. Virtuosity in the right hand. There's the theme, now on the top. And now we're in for a big circle of fifths here. Theme in the bass? What is it? He's just teasing. Where is the theme? I hear a bit of it. Not all of it. There it is. And now one final climactic entry in the top. And this fugue ends short in major. And speaking of E minor, we're staying in E minor. This is the little unfinished prelude here. How little, we don't know. It's unfinished. We find it in the notebook for his son, WF. Possibly there were pieces written together. They started writing a prelude in C, then another in D, and this one in E minor. Has all the hallmarks of his mature style, doesn't it? But all of a sudden, someone knocks at the door. No one answers. And someone knocks at the door. Bach puts down his pen and, All right, let's get the door. Okay, this is the part of the record that I refer to as the C major sandwich, because I've got a fugue here, followed by a prelude, contrapuntal prelude, followed by another fugue. This is BWV 953. I played this piece as a child, personal favorite of mine. Love this part here, going into E minor. And my absolute favorite part here, the soprano line here. Up to C. Absolute favorite. And then we have like an organ. We can imagine the feet playing here. And now on to the center of the C major sandwich. This is the Prelude BWV 953. It's a standalone piece, and it seems to fit in stylistically with his sinfonias. It's 3-part counterpoint, just beautifully done. For me, this is really the second sinfonia in C major. Absolutely brilliant, worthy to be called the sinfonia, worthy to be in that set. It has been grouped by various editors over time into the 6 small preludes, and probably with other preludes that do not appear on this record, but that's really an incorrect grouping. This piece is a standalone anomaly. Not a little piece, not to be called little. Not that his little pieces are ever really simple, but this piece is quite mature, we could say. And a little minor 4 flavor. This is the fugue BWV 952. It reminds us of the other fugue 2 tracks ago. The first part of the sandwich, we could say. Not only because it's a stream of 16th notes, but its length, around 33 bars each fugue, and also the shape of the theme is similar, and the spirit is very similar. This is my personal favorite part here. The left-hand lines. Whoop, try again. Whoop, try again. And now we go. Subdominant. Bach has a way of doing that. Before the finale of the piece, he likes to sort of fall down to the subdominant and then climb up into these triumphant moments back in the home key. Aha! This is the prelude, BWV 895. Almost a fantasy, this prelude. Although it picks up after a time, becoming eventually measured. But we could call it rhetorical, brief statements of speech. Early, 1709. You'll see its fugue, like the other early fugues, has a lot of repeated notes. The spirit here, very similar to the fantasies. And it's over. This is the fugue, 895. What do I have to say about this fugue? Not much, probably. I can at least try and point out where all the subjects are, where all the themes are. Here we have one up high, and in the middle, also in the middle, here in the bottom. Interesting harmonic crunches here. The theme up top. Ooh, this area, very special. We hear the theme there. The fugue ends with a flourish, reminiscent of his earlier fugues, where he would improvise, although you could already see here, I suppose, in this fugue, that he's getting away from that. Because even this improvisation here is more calculated than, say, the earlier fugue in A minor on the record, BWV 959. And this fugue has met its end. So these are the 6 little preludes, the so-called preludes for the beginners. These are 6 pieces, not so easy. In binary form, here you'll see we're at the beginning again. The first half is repeated, and the second half is repeated in each of the 6. I don't think I'll have time to get into the story of these 6 preludes on this particular track. So let's just listen to the second half without my commentary, and we will hear the story in the next prelude. So now, the story of these 6 little preludes, they come to us through the estate of Bach's son, CPE. Now, CPE died in 1788, and in 1790, there was a detailed, comprehensive account of his works. It's referred to in the business as NV 1790. So Bach scholars will know what you're talking about when you mention NV 1790. And in this work, this catalog known as NV 1790, there's mention of a notebook that was in the Bach family, wherein were compositions for younger members of the entire family. So these are beginners. Now, second half here, by the way, in the prelude. This notebook is lost, but there were perhaps compositions from CPE, his half-brother, the London Bach J.C., and of course, Papa J.S. Bach, and possibly Papa J.S. Bach's Papa and other people. And this collection of 6 preludes was found in the notebook. I tend to think of this particular C minor prelude as Bach teaching his other members of the family how to charm snakes. I mean, these winding lines and dissonances landing on the beats, like this. And now D major. The way that it's usually transmitted is C major, C minor, D minor, D major, E major, E minor, but that sort of goes against the standards of the time, which is major, minor, major, minor, major, minor. So I've preserved that here. I find this is a trio sonata for the beginner. You've got your 2 obbligato lines in the right hand and your walking bass line in the left hand. And I feel there's a little joke here in the second half coming up. There is the highest note typically on the keyboards of this time would be a D, just the one above 2 letter lines. But we find an E here, extremely, extremely rare for the Bach keyboard repertoire. In fact, I can think of pretty much one only other instance where that happens in the late concerti. And Bach's son or someone in the family would have said, "But how do you play this, Bach, Papa Bach?" And here it is. That one, that dum. And Bach would have said, well, it's easy, you just whistle the top note. D minor, a fearsome, fiery piece, especially if you take it at this tempo. What I love about these pieces, and pretty much every piece by Bach, and you could even say of this era, is that there is no sparing the beginners from virtuosity. Maybe beginners can play this, but professionals can also play these pieces quite virtuosically. And I think that's possibly a lesson for all of us. Back then, teaching music 200, 300 years ago, they were not giving them this spoon-fed beginner nutrient paste with a few notes on the page. These were full-fledged compositions that could be taken and performed on the highest levels. Can we take that lesson into today? This is the E major, very spring-like. Do I associate spring with this piece because Vivaldi's Spring is in E major, or I don't know. It just has this joyous quality. 4 sharps in the key signature. The tuning would have been possibly very bright. The 6th French Suite, the E major violin concerto, the E major violin partita for that matter. Bright, joyful music. Until, of course, the second half when he'll go into the relative minor and start playing with C sharp minor, then it gets very dark indeed there. Let's listen to that. Here it comes, the mystery. But soon it's over and we're fighting our way out of it. But Bach will do that, the brighter the first half, the darker the second half. Here's the second half again. And the last of the 6 preludes for beginners, the E minor here. Possibly the most popular of the set. I did not play these pieces as a child, so I don't have personal experience from childhood, but people tell me this one is very well known. Here's the second half now. We'll see some examples of convertible counterpoint, that is, like a convertible, the top comes down. What was on the top will be on the bottom, and vice versa. Especially in this last part here, the left-hand line with the ornaments. We found it on top at first. Now this piece is one of 3 preludes for the same fugue. This is 902A, meaning that the BWV system didn't make room enough for this to have its own BWV. Again, it's one of 3 preludes that introduces the same fugue to follow. The fugue which you may recognize as Book 2's G major fugue. I happen to love this prelude. toccata. Absolute virtuosic, show-stopping piece. And now the fugue. You know this fugue possibly from these books that have little preludes and fugues, but this is indeed the same fugue that works its way into Book 2 of the Well-Tempered Clavier. He refines it quite a bit and adds more virtuosic flourishes in the Well-Tempered Clavier. But like I mentioned, this fugue will have 3 preludes: the previous track, the following track, and the prelude from Book 2. It's evident that Bach went back rummaging through his papers really to make Book 2, which is much more of a piecemeal composition than Book 1. And now the fugue is wrapping up, and we are at the last track of the album, right after this. Now this track, this is the gorgeous, stunning jewel of the preludes that are not in the Well-Tempered Clavier. This is the G major prelude BWV 902, and I've chosen to end with it on the record because I think it's a really mature, beautiful masterpiece. I wanted to talk about what a prelude is, considering we know what a fugue is. I talk about that a lot on the podcast, and maybe a fugue is a bit more complicated to explain. So let's just get into it here. In the Baroque, fugues were central to composition. They were absolutely the pinnacle of art due to their complexity of independently moving parts. It was the highest and most demanding test for a musician to compose or even improvise a fugue. And so important, fugues were usually introduced by simpler compositions to, get ready to fugue, to showcase virtuosity perhaps, to engage in the musical fantasy, or to even ready the palette for that higher fugal art, or probably a combination of all the things I mentioned. Now, Bach had about 3 ways of introducing his fugues, at least 3 titles for them. Prelude, which was sometimes preambulum, preludio, etc., toccata, and fantasy. Now, compared to his 7 or 8-ish toccatas and 8 or 10-ish fantasies, it was the prelude that Bach seemed to prefer, because some 78 examples compared to the, 8 to 10 examples of toccatas or the fantasies. 78 examples of the prelude survives. Just in the solo keyboard repertoire alone, not mentioning the organs or the preludes to the cantatas or anything like that. Just in the solo keyboard work, 78 preludes. Now, many compositions blur the distinction between the 3, such as the prelude fantasy we had earlier on the album. But it can generally be said that the prelude is, let's say, stricter in harmony than a fantasy and less virtuosic than a toccata. And it might be also said that Bach's preludes are generally shorter than both examples, toccatas and the fantasies. But the later preludes, the mature preludes, such as this one, these are substantial compositions that dwarf the earlier examples of the prelude. As for this piece itself, it is, again, one of those beautiful compositions I don't really want to say too much about. We should just, like Einstein said, I think, about Bach, sit back and shut your trap or something like that. It reminds us of the A minor fantasy, BWV 904. This initial gesture here, for example, it reminds me of the D major saraband in the 4th keyboard partita, some of the playful lines at the end. But in any case, it is really, I think, probably the masterpiece of the prelude genre, again, that doesn't find its way into any of the books of the Well-Tempered Clavier. And as we're coming to the close of the second half, during the repeat, I will give the album credits. The producer was Thomas Rosen. The mixer was Armand Hirsch. The recording was made possible through a generous grant from Laurie Rosen and Thomas Rosen, and it was recorded in Minneapolis, Minnesota on December 27th and 28th, 2022. Special thanks to Andrea Profili, Michael Stephen Brown, Robert Hill, and Bonnie Barrett, and everyone at Yamaha. Thanks to you for listening.